Dear St. John's and friends, thank you for joining us for this message in a time of shutdown and worry over COVID-19. I want you to know that, yes, like many of you, I am very concerned. And yet in the middle of that worry, I have found a dynamic hope. Today I want to share a little bit of that hope with you. As I prepare this message, the United States is leading the world in the number of confirmed diagnosed cases of COVID-19, and that's without having a uniform system of testing. The church building is closed to gatherings, and we are learning to be together in different ways. If you had told me a month ago that I would be facilitating religious education classes online in a Zoom room, I just would never have believed it, and yet this past week I did it twice. Once I gathered with a group of you to talk about Theodore Parker's 1841 sermon on the transient and permanent in Christianity, and again we gathered to talk about our hymnal and take a little deeper dive into the meaning of some of those hymn texts. I've always said that we sing our theology. No one has ever walked out of the sanctuary humming the sermon. But music and hymns lodge in our brain differently. And a favorite hymn of mine is number 1023 from Singing the Journey. It's this little, it's the teal, what we call the teal hymnals, this one here. And it's called Building Bridges. And it was actually, when I looked at who wrote this, it is written by the Greenham Common Peace Occupation of England in 1983. I have no idea what that means, but I'm pretty sure there's a story there. It's probably worth Googling at least. The music is a contemporary English Quaker round. This is what it sounds like when I sing it. Building bridges between our division, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we can make such sweet harmony. And if you imagine it as a round, you understand how totally incomplete and unreasonable it is to try to sing it alone. It's a round. It requires people coming together to sing together. And I love that it's a round because I am a very big fan of a round church. I am a little bit suspicious of, and maybe even an outright disbeliever in a church that faces forward to focus on one person, which makes this whole experience of recording sermons a little peculiar. But like I said, we're all doing things we didn't think we would do before. In a round church, we can do the real work of building community. We look across to one another. We build those bridges from person to person. We build up the congregation. And that is a valuable and holy thing. How do we do that in an age of social distancing? How do we look at people and say, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? How do we make a space for people to come together across the distances and connect in a real, meaningful way? We're having to invent new ways all the time. And yet, I think Theodore Parker, in his 1841 sermon, 1841, I think he had a part of the answer. He didn't even know it. Parker challenges the faithful to hold on to something deeper than the momentary word, the passing away of cultural forms and theological fads. He proposes that beneath all the forms of religion is a deeper understanding that will hold us and challenge us and bring us into a divine embodiment of what is real and good and true. At one point in the sermon, he talks about this dynamic with the permanent and the transient as an angel wearing a robe. If we get focused on the robe, we forget to look at the angel. But the angel might change robes and still be an angel. The challenge for people of faith is to see the angel through the robes. The challenge for people of faith is to be able to see what is permanent and true and good and let what is temporary or what is of the culture of the moment fall away. The key to the center of faith is to understand what calls us to the good and to put our energy there, not upon the external forms, the forms that would tempt us to debate this fine point or that fine point, or distract us with superficial forms of piety. For me, Parker's sermon on the transient and permanent sounds an echo of that old wisdom literature from Ecclesiastes, you know the one, the vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's the King James Version. Other translations are likewise just as dramatic, with this coming from the New Living Tradition Bible. Everything is meaningless, or the Contemporary English Version. Nothing makes sense, everything is nonsense. I have seen it all and nothing makes sense. There are mornings now when I wake up and I watch the news and I want to echo that Contemporary English Version of the Bible. Nothing makes sense, I want to shout to the heavens. Nothing makes sense. We know better how to take care of each other, and as a nation, we are just now starting to do what needs to be done. And Ecclesiastes says, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Nothing makes sense, I've seen it all. But wait, what am I doing as a Unitarian quoting the Bible? How does that make sense? Well, I'll tell you. Parker, who is calling us back to the permanent Christianity, Parker says, and I believe, that it's not that we discard the Bible, it's that we look on it with a critical eye and we hold it in the light of conscience. Only then will we be able to take from it the wisdom that is there for us, that has been brought to us by our ancestors in faith. He warns that allegiance to the text without conscience and reason would bind us to the transient and distract us from the permanent. I think the same is true if I get to attach the words of that little hymn, Building Bridges. Building bridges can't be limited to the confines of the church, or to assume that reaching out to you and you reaching out to me must be a literal hand-reaching hand. That's not true. We who hear the words can find new meaning, new ways of being. Reaching out does not mean what it used to or what it one day will. Bridges can be built in song. They can be built online. They can be built across national borders. Paul Robeson was an international singing sensation and a political activist working for social change. He was also a little threatening to the powers that be in Washington, and we're talking about the late 1940s, the early 1950s. They were worried that he might be a communist, and so they took away his passport and wouldn't let him travel particularly to this one concert he had planned in Canada. So Robeson and his friends gathered together right near that border, right on the edge of that imaginary line, and the crowd gathered on the other side, and Robeson sang, and they listened. It was good. It was good. Robeson said, I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom or words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of fear and despair. He found a new way. And the way doesn't always have to be big. I had promised you, one of you, this past week that I would run a short errand. But to be me is to live with seasonal allergies. So the questions the news keeps asking, the questions of, do you feel well today? Are you coughing? Those questions are potentially meaningless depending on the pollen count. Am I coughing? Yes. Do I feel well? Well, let's see what's in bloom. So I've been monitoring my own temperature because I figured that's a good objective way to know how I feel. So I took my temperature and it had gone up above where it should be. And I know what this is. I know this is allergies. I know that I'm not sick. I know. And what if I am wrong? What if I am mistaken? Where yesterday it might not have mattered, today my responsibility to the community is greater. Today, it's not about what I think I know. It's about taking care of the people in our community. It's about having the ability to call on someone else in our community and ask them to fulfill the obligation, to fulfill the promise that I have made. And they did it happily. And that elevated fever thing seemed to have been a one-off. I've been taking my temperature twice a day since then. Nothing else has happened. This thinking communally instead of individually might just become a new way of living, and I'm not so sure that would be bad. We stay healthy and observe social distancing not because of the singular self, but because we all need to do our part that we collectively might be well. We keep building bridges in new ways, classes on Zoom, coffee hour on Google Meets, neighbors talking across fences because all of a sudden we're all home at the same time. So those people that you saw only in brief passing, you can now stop and say hello and really have a conversation. Friends, some things matter deeply and they will keep mattering, and some things will pass away. Today, it is easy to wake up and say it's all overwhelming and meaningless and useless, and it's all vanity, it's all vanity of a few super powerful people. But the Hebrew word for vanity is hevel, meaning wind, meaning breath, but not like a living breath, like the breath that's already spent and done. There's another Hebrew word for breath, ruah, the breath of life. Where hevel will pass away, ruah will sustain. When I cannot do whatever it is I think I must, maybe we can do it together. This moment of history will pass. A more eternal truth awaits. We have not been, are not now, and will not be alone. Now is the time to answer a call to a new way of breathing, a new way of building, a new way of being together. Together, we are deeply faithful to the love that holds us and calls us forward, even as we are flexible and able to move in the moment and do what we must to care for each other. So until we meet again, my friends,